Good evening. It's good to be back with you again, and we'll continue our lesson that we was looking at this morning, and that's where we're evaluating Judges chapter 11 and looking at the vow that Jephthah made unto God, and what most commentators or a lot of people, this what was the outcome of his daughter due to his vow. Turn my clicker on. So this was our lesson review this morning, and we made it through really halfway. We're actually we're in partway through the topic, what happened to Jephthah's daughter. Now I'm going to start getting tongue-tied. We talked about who Jephthah was, and we pointed out that he was a mighty warrior, that he was a son of Gilead, and his mother was a prostitute, so he was a half-son to Gilead and his wife's sons, and because of that, they cast him out of the family. They didn't want him to be around there. And so he grew up in the land of Todd, and the King James Version was the only version I found that said that he was a raider when he went over there. Of course, that this was a pagan land, so he would have grown up probably not knowing much about the Jewish, much about Jehovah or the Jewish customs. The people of Ammon made war with Israel, and then the elders of Gilead, I guess I'll just assume that they knew the reputation of Jephthah, and so they came up with the idea, let's go and get Jephthah to command our people to make war against the people of Ammon in the event that they invade us. And we also pointed out that he's listed as one of the fathers of faith there in the book of Hebrews. And then we talked about his vow that he made, and just to remind us, his vow was, if you will, this was his plea to God, he said, if you will indeed deliver the people of Ammon into my hands, then it will be that whatever comes out of the doors of my house to meet me, then I return in peace from the people of Ammon shall surely be the Lord's, and I will offer it up as a burnt offering. So then we started evaluating verses 34 through 40, which is the account when he arrives back that his daughter comes out, and I can't remember if I read that part, but let's pick up in verse 36. I don't think I read that part where it says, so she said, and this is after. Let me go back to verse 35. It says, and it came to pass, when he saw her, that he tore his clothes, and he said, alas, my daughter, you have brought me very low. You are among those who trouble me. For I have given my word to the Lord, and I cannot go back on it. And she said to him, my father, if you have given your word to the Lord, do it to me according to what you have gone out of your mouth, because the Lord has avenged you of your enemies, the people of Ammon. Then she said to her father, let this thing be done for me. Let me alone for 2 months, that I may go and wander on the mountains and bewail my virginity, my friends and I. But in verse 48, he says, go, and he sent her away for 2 months, and she went with her friends and bewailed her virginity on the mountain. And it was at the end of the 2 mountains that she returned to her father, and she carried out his vow, and with her which he had vowed. She knew no man. And it came to pass, and it became a custom in Israel that the daughters of Israel went 4 days each year to lament the daughter of Jephthah the Gileadite. So that's the account when he comes home. So she comes out, and he's sorrowful. He tears his clothes. He breaks the news to her, and then obviously she was a person of faith, or held God in high esteem, because she said, if that's what came out of your mouth, then so it will be. I will do according to what the vow that you made unto the Lord. And so we were studying this case, the evidence that people put forth, that the idea that because he said that he made a vow, and whatever came forth from his doors, that he would give it up as a burnt offering. So a lot of people interpret that as meaning that that he put her upon the altar, and then he would have had to slain her, and then she would have been consumed with fire. And so that's we express that the offered as a burnt offering always refers to an actual burnt offering, as some of the evidence that they put forth, and that Jephthah's vow, he would make a sacrifice there in verse 31. And then we see in verse 39 that he did according to his vow. So that, again, people would take that as evidence that he fulfilled offering up his daughter as a burnt offering. And then we also discussed that that because Jephthah grew up in a pagan society, and we saw that he recognized Chemosh there in verse 24 as the god of the Moabites. And that over in 2 Kings verse 3, chapter 3, verse 27, that when the Moabites was under siege, that the king offered up his son as a sacrifice in hope that he would be saved from being invaded, but that was to no avail. But the point being is that the Moabites practiced child sacrifices, that they offered up their children unto their gods. And so that the idea there being that Jephthah would have had, being grown up in that area and around those people, that was what was on his mind when he offered up a vow to save him. They really, the commentary that I was reading, they really paint a dismal picture of Jephthah, and that he was very selfish, that they make the plea that he had this all in mind from the get-go, because it was of his heritage or his background that they would offer up children, just as there in 2 Kings chapter 3. And so therefore, all along, he had a good idea that it would be his daughter that would be the first thing that he would see when he came back. But again, that's speaking where the Bible doesn't speak. That's not necessarily what the evidence there holds, but I suppose anything could be plausible. And then they'll also point out that there's no example of perpetual virginity. We'll look at it here in just a few minutes when we evaluate the laws concerning the vow. If you vow something that you didn't really mean to vow in the beginning, there's often a way that you can redeem it, that you can pay a certain tax or a price for that particular thing. Like people would offer up their property unto the Lord if, I suppose some good come their way or whatnot. And then once that vow was fulfilled, of course you can't destroy property. You can't put it upon the altar to burn it. so they would give it over to the priest, and the priest would it would become the property of the tabernacle or the property of the priesthood. And so the idea is that that's what happened to his daughter. Some put forth that she went to work with the priesthood, not that she was a priestess, but that perhaps she was one of the women in the Old Testament talks about women being at the doors, that they would open up the doors as people come into the tabernacle to offer up sacrifices. But they say that there's no example of anybody offering up their virginity and going and doing such a thing. So if that was the case, Jephthah would be the only time that this would ever have happened. So that's the evidence, or that's the case for that she was sacrificed upon the altar. Now we're going to look at it from the other standpoint, and we're going to put forth the case for that his daughter was not sacrificed upon the altar. And I think the first thing that we need to point out is that God despises human sacrifice. Nowhere in the Scriptures can you find that God condoned the killing of an individual. Sacrificing of children, and of course the Levitical law was written before this time, that sacrificing children to idols carried the death penalty. That's how much he despised it. Look with me over in Leviticus chapter 20, verses 1 through 5. It says, "The Lord spake unto Moses," again this is the Lord now, not Moses, but the Lord spake unto Moses, saying, "Say to the people of Israel, any one of the people of Israel, or the strangers who sojourn in Israel, who gives any of his children to Molech, shall surely be put to death. The people of the land shall stone him with stones. I myself will set my face upon that man, and will cut him off among his people, because he has given one of his children to Molech, to make a sanctuary unclean, and to profane my holy name. And if the people of the land do not close their eyes to that man when he gives one of his children to Molech, and do not put him to death, then I will set my face against the man and against the clan, and will cut them off from among the people, him and all who follow him in the whoring after Molech." So this to give their children over to Molech was it was a sacrifice, that they would kill their children in a sacrifice, in a type of sacrifice. Some historians believe that it went as far as that there was these brass sculptures that were hollow, that resembled some animal or whatnot, and they would put those small children inside of there and set it over a fire, and then those children would literally cook to death, if you will. And some historians say that that's where the beating of drums and this idea of music and stuff during sacrifices came to existence. That often the people or the priest, the high priest, would have some type of noise in order to drown out the screaming of the children. So that's just how heinous those people were back at that time, and that they would offer up their children unto a false god. And we can clearly see in Leviticus chapter 20 there that God despised such a thing, and that those words that he would cut them off, that they would no longer be of the tribe of Israel, that they would no longer be in existence, that they would not be numbered among the people. That's how much he despised them. So it wasn't enough that they would be put to death, but then it was basically condemning them to Gehenna or to hell. And he even goes even further, that if anybody harbors such an individual, that the entire clan would be wiped out because of such a heinous thing. So God definitely did not tolerate human sacrifice, especially that of children. We also see in the case over in Jeremiah chapter 7, over in Jeremiah, God says that he because by this time over in Jeremiah, people have gone to apostate. They've started worshiping false gods. God points out that He's never asked for such a type of sacrifice over in Jeremiah. And if we chapter 7, starting verse 31, it says, "And they have built the high places, Topheth, which is the valley of the son of Hinnom, to burn their sons and their daughters in the fire, which I did not command, nor did it come into my mind. Therefore, behold, the days are coming, declared the Lord, when it will no more be called Tetheth, and the valley of the son of Hinnom, but the valley of slaughter, for they will bury in Topheth, because this is no room elsewhere." Getting the glaring eyes of my pronunciations, so apologize for that. But nonetheless, we can see during that and this is after Jephthah, that again, that God does not that despises such a thing, and He points out there to Jeremiah that he never condoned, or it never even crossed his mind that such a sacrifice should be offered up on his behalf, and we see there that he's going to lay that to waste, and that it would become the valley of slaughter. We can also consider Deuteronomy chapter 12, verse 29 through 32. Over there it says, "When the Lord your God cuts off before you the nations whom you go into disposes, and you disposes them and dwell in their land. Take care that you be not ensnared to follow them after they have been destroyed before you, and that you do not inquire about their gods, saying, how did these nations serve their gods, that I also may do the same." In verse 31 he says, "You shall not worship the Lord your God in that way. For every abominable thing that the Lord hates, they have done for their gods. For they even burn their sons, their daughters in the fire to their gods. Everything that I command you, you shall be careful to do. You shall not add to it or take from it." So again, he just reinforces there in Deuteronomy, the book of Deuteronomy, that the Lord despises, and He's forewarning them when they go over into the promised land. Don't inquire how those people worship things, and don't even begin to hold their customs in my name. And of course, we can go back to Leviticus to see how He would deal with such a thing. So I think clearly from these passages we can see that the Lord condemned such heinous acts. Now let's look at some special rules for vows. I suppose there might be some that we run into that might be saying, "Well, I hear what you're saying, but if you give a vow, you have to fulfill it." Well, let's look and see what those rules are. When the vow was fulfilled, the offering had to be made, and that is most certainly true. We see over in Deuteronomy chapter 23, verses 21 through 23. It says, "If you make a vow to the Lord your God, you shall not delay in fulfilling it, for the Lord your God will surely require it of you, and you will be guilty of sin. But if you refrain from vowing, you will not be guilty. But if you refrain from vowing, you will not be guilty of sin. You shall be careful to do what has passed your lips, for you have voluntarily vowed to the Lord your God what you have promised with your mouth." So we can see from vows that God never expected people to give vows unto him. It was never required as an act of their worship. However, people like to promise things, and I think we've probably all been there, especially when we're little children. Oh God, if I get that toy, I'll do this or I'll do that. Or I can remember getting in trouble a few times saying, oh Lord, if I just don't get a whipping tonight, I'll be sure and be good from now on. So I think we've all been in those places one time or another. That would be a type of vow. Of course, we've made those in innocence and not realizing what we were saying. However, but I think people do that, and they probably continue to do that today. I've been to many promotions ceremonies and heard many people thanking God for the opportunity they provided them, and saying that they had promised that they would do such a thing if they ever received such a position and whatnot. So I think it's possible that we can even still make vows today, and we should heed to that whatever passes your lips, you've committed that to the Lord. Just as Jephthah, when he made his vow, just about anything that a person owned could be vowed to God. Let's continue to read Ecclesiastes chapter 5, verses 1 through 5. It says, guard your steps when you go to the house of God, to draw near to listen to better than to offer the sacrifices of fools, for they do not know that they are doing evil. Be not rash with your mouth, nor let your heart be hastily to utter a word before God, for God is in heaven and you are on earth. Therefore, let your words be few, for a dream comes with such business, and a fool's voice with many words. When you vow a vow to God, do not delay in paying it, for he has no pleasure in fools. Pay what you vow. It is better that you should not vow than that you should vow and not pay. So we can clearly see that there was an obligation to fulfill those vows unto the Lord. So now let's look at some special rules, or continue. Just about again, anything could be vowed unto God. Leviticus chapter 27, verses 2 through 8. We see over there that people could be vowed themselves. And since we're discussing his daughter, let's just look at that real quick. Leviticus chapter 27, verses 2 through 8. Speak to the children of Israel, say to them, when a man consecrates a vow, certain persons to the Lord, according to your valuation. If your valuation is of a male from 20 years up to 60 years old, then your valuation shall be 50 shekels of silver, according to the shekel of the sanctuary. If it is a female, then your valuation shall be 30 shekels, and if from 5 years old up to 20 years old, then your valuation for a male shall be 20 shekels, and for a female 10 shekels. And from a month old to 5 years old, your valuation for a male will be 5 shekels of silver, and for a female your valuation shall be 3 shekels of silver. And if from 6 years old and above, if it is male, then your valuation shall be 15 shekels, and for the female 10 shekels. But if he is too poor to pay your valuation, then he shall present himself before the priest, and the priest shall set a value for him according to the ability of him who vowed. The priest shall value him. So we can clearly see from those passages that God never, if he vowed a person, it wasn't that they were to be sacrificed. It was that there was a value assessed to them, and then that value is what you would pay unto the priest for that vow. So that's how that was the rules concerning people. We also see for livestock, people could vow homes. Again, if you offered up a burnt offering, you're not going to put a house upon the altar. And then also, like I said, with property, one could vow property unto God, and then of course it would go over to the priest because you vowed it if you could not pay the valuation of it. Most vow offerings could be bought back, and that's what, if you read Leviticus chapter 27, that's basically what all that's saying. If you vowed this is how much you have to pay to get it back. That's basically what chapter 27 is pointing out. The thing that could not be brought back would be anything that was considered to be destroyed. Of course, sacrificial animals, and we see that in verse 9 and 10. It says, if it is an animal that man may bring as an offering to the Lord, all that anyone gives to the Lord shall be holy. He shall not substitute it or exchange it, good for bad or bad for good, and if he has all exchanges animal for animal, then both it and the one exchanged for it shall be holy. So again, anything that was sacrificial animals could not be bought back, that they were considered holy or that they was considered that of God's. Firstborn clean animals could not be bought back either. Of course, we know why is that is because those were the Lord's to begin with. So there was there's really no purpose in you're basically vowing something to the Lord that was already the Lord's to begin with. Or anything set apart for destruction, like I say, there in verse 28. Nevertheless, not devoted offering that a man may devote to the Lord all that he has, both man and beast, or the field of his possession, shall be sold or redeemed. Every devoted offering is most holy to the Lord. Like I said, anything set aside for destruction, that's why sacrificial animals, since they were set aside to be sacrificed, they could not be redeemed. Those are the only things that could not be redeemed under the Levitical law. Matter of fact, this I have here that this is how Samuel, the firstborn son of a Levite, we see this over in 1 Chronicles 6, 16 and 28, came to serve the Lord, that his mother made a vow that she would give a child. The child would be given to the Lord, and through the Leviticus 27 allows for vowed children to be redeemed. A firstborn child already belongs to the God, and hence cannot be redeemed. So that's how Samuel came into the service of the priesthood, is because he was vowed by his mother and he was a firstborn. So she could not buy him back. She could not give over the valuation of him because he was a firstborn son. So that's how that works. So in the case of Jephthah, his daughter was a firstborn, and she was his only daughter. So he could not assess an evaluation and purchase her back to have her remain there within his home. And that's what I just said. Getting ahead of myself. And since she was vowed for destruction, she would then be marked as most holy to God, and that's what I believe happened to his daughter. That she went into the service of the priesthood. So some people might say, well, why then did Jephthah tear his clothes if it was that simple? That, well, okay, she wasn't going to live with him. She was going to go live over here. No big deal. They would occasionally see one another and everything would be good. We got to consider what the times was. She was his only child, and she never conceived nor had born a child, and it very clearly points this out. As a matter of fact, she went up on the mountain to mourn her virginity. Then it says, and why I think he tore his clothes is because during biblical times, to die without progeny or to die without descendants was considered a terrible fate. It was often befell upon people, or people were viewed that you had done some terrible thing or you hadn't done right, and that's why you were being punished. And so during the Old Testament times, it was it was something that nobody wanted. Nobody wanted to die old. Nobody wanted to grow old alone, nor die alone. And men did not want. They wanted to pass on their lineage. That was a big sign of manhood, and it was something that was very favorable and something that all sought out. And I think that's why Jephthah ripped his clothes, is because when he realized when his daughter came out that he made a vow for a burnt offering, and he knew since she was the first thing that he saw that she would no longer be available to bear children or descendants that would carry on his lineage. And so I believe that's why Jephthah tore his clothes. So why, Jim, did you give this lesson? Why these two different perspectives? Well, I think it's important to realize that non-believers will use passages like this against you. I've debated a lot of atheists. Well, I won't say a lot, but several atheists online. They like to pick out these accounts and say, well, how could if you have such a fair and just God, how could he do such a thing? And so, and then many atheists will beat on their chest and say, well, we know the Bible better than what you do. You don't realize what's in the Bible. Another one that they like to pick out is I had his name and it eludes Elisha and the bear. That's another account where they will make the plea, well, how could a God kill all those children with a bear? Well, the passage doesn't say that they were killed. But nonetheless, the takeaway is that you don't make fun of a prophet of God, or by doing so, you're making fun of God to begin with. But nonetheless, I think it's good that we study these things and we're able to talk to these and defend the Scriptures so that when people point these things out, that we can correct them and let them know, what is really being said there. And then when it comes to vows, we need to realize that, we can make vows yet today. Vows are a solemn promise to God. And maybe we don't use the word vow. Maybe we don't, say vow, but how many times have you, well, I promise the Lord I'll do this. Well, I promise I'll do that. I think in our society today, that word promise just rolls right off our tongue, and often it's words that we never really mean to fulfill to begin with, but yet we use it in everyday language, and it just rolls off our tongue. But does God, allow us to do that. I would say, considering how he viewed vows back in Leviticus, again, it was something that was never levied upon the people to do, but yet if they felt or compelled to do so, then so be it. But if you hadn't, and there was several warnings that were read there that we need to be careful in what we say. And I think that's just as much true as today. Rash circumstances is not an excuse to not fulfill one's promise. That's certainly the situation there with Jephthah and in the vow that he's made. Most people view that it was a rash a decision that he made when he looked over there at the Ammonites, and that he feared, so therefore he made a vow unto the Lord, and but he fulfilled the vow unto the Lord, and so that if we make such a vow, we should do so as well. And vows should not be taken lightly. Like I say, and I think in today's society, whether we vow it to God or we vow it to one another, like I say, we make promises to one another all the time, and I know I've been guilty in the past of not fulfilling some of my promises, and so I think we would be we need to be cautious in what we're saying and realize that when we promise to do something, we need to do it, or we just not need to say anything at all. And considering offerings, when we look to Christ, he gave us the ultimate offering, did he not? His death upon the cross is described as a combination of offerings. He was over in the book of Hebrews, it's described as a sin offering. We look over there in chapter 13, verses, starting there in verse 10, it says, "We have an altar for which those who serve the tent have no right to eat, for the bodies of those animals whose blood is brought into the holy places by the high priest as a sacrifice for sin are burnt outside the camp. So Jesus also suffered outside the gate in order to sanctify the people through his own blood. Therefore, let us go to him outside the camp and bear the reproach he endured." So he was a sin offering, and he was also a form of a burnt offering too. Consider over in Ephesians chapter 5, verse 2, where it says, "And walk in love as Christ loved us and gave himself up for us, a fragrant offering and sacrifice to God." Burnt offerings are often described as being a sweet-smelling aroma unto God. So Christ's sacrifice was a sweet-smelling, is often characterized as a sweet-smelling sacrifice as well. So God gave himself wholly of God, so that we would appease his wrath unto us. So I think that we should remember, always keep that in reflection, and especially when we make promises and vows, and realize that he fulfilled his promise to us by hanging on the cross, and therefore we should fulfill our vows if we make any, or fulfill any promises that we make. And so I think that's the application to us, and we can look to Jephthah to see how serious such a vow should be carried out. Now we want to set aside that time that we call the invitation. The lesson is yours, and we'll leave it to you. This is the opportunity